entry because of recent bans on several visa categories. Trump's rhetoric is almost exclusively about undocumented immigrants. He calls undocumented immigrants everything from murderers and rapists to gang members, etc. But in fact, the policy changes he has put in place, almost all are chipping away at the legal immigration system. Noting projections that the coronavirus could last into next year, Nchape said the 2020 presidential election carried extra weight for immigrants being denied benefits or who have worked through the pandemic because they are essential workers. For immigrants, this election is consequential. It's truly a matter of life and death for people. The pandemic has exposed existing inequalities for immigrants. One of the most glaring examples is the exclusion of undocumented immigrants and, in the case of stimulus checks, their U.S. citizen spouses from economic relief. NILC is pushing for all immigrants to have access to health care and testing regardless of their immigration and economic status. At all levels, we've seen how immigrants have been excluded from the federal relief packages, and at the same time the pandemic is showing how absolutely dependent we are on these immigrants who are carrying out the essential roles. Biden is committed to creating a pathway to citizenship for the country's 11 million undocumented immigrants, something a majority of Americans have long said they support, but has failed to become law in Congress. Nchape said she was confident a Biden administration would prioritize this. She noted Biden's comments praising essential workers who are immigrants and said that this attention could be important as the pandemic continues. Biden, particularly when it comes to immigrants, would be providing a very different vision for a country in which immigrants are seen as part of our country and part of our strength and part of our diversity. Can't disagree with any of that. Okay, moving on. This next article is entitled, How the Coronavirus Spread Through One Immigration Facility. Ugh. Gregory Arnold walked into the warden's office April 1st as the novel coronavirus ripped through one of the largest immigration detention centers in the United States. Waiting with about 40 guards to begin his shift, he heard a captain say face masks were prohibited. Incredulous, he and a guard who recently gave birth wanted to hear it from the boss. Arnold told Warden Christopher LaRose that he was 60 years old and lived with an asthmatic son. Well, you can't wear the mask because we don't want to scare the employees and we don't want to scare the inmates and detainees, Arnold recalls the warden saying. With all due respect, sir, that's ridiculous, Arnold retorted. He said he wanted to wear a mask and gloves, and everyone else should be doing the same, but the warden was unmoved, and in the weeks that followed, Ota Mesa Detention Center would see the first big outbreak at U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement's 221 detention centers. The origins of the outbreak are uncertain, but accounts of workers and detainees reveal shortcomings in how the private company that managed the center handled the disease. There was an early absence of facial coverings and a lack of cleaning supplies. Symptomatic detainees were mixed with others. Other centers would follow with their own outbreaks, and a Homeland Security Department internal watchdog survey of 188 detention centers taken in mid-April echoed some of that. Echoed some of what the Associated Press found at Ota Mesa. 19% of facility directors said there weren't enough standard surgical masks, 32% said there weren't enough N95 respirator masks, and 37% felt there wasn't enough hand sanitizer for detainees. Like prisons, living conditions are cramped, except people held in immigration detention centers aren't accused of any crimes. They wait to appear before an immigration judge to argue they should be allowed to remain in the country. Let me repeat that. Like prisons, living conditions are cramped, except people held in immigration detention centers aren't accused of any crimes. Could be you, could be me, could be anybody. Ota Mesa sits on a tucked-away periphery of San Diego amid vehicle storage lots, a gas-fired power plant, a state prison, county jail, and juvenile detention camp. ICE's average daily population of 956 detainees last year made it the agency's 11th busiest detention center. The squat two-story facility, managed under contract by Core Civic Incorporated and shared with U.S. Marshals Services inmates, is surrounded by 2 layers of chain-link fence topped by razor wire. Rooms of 2 to 4 bunk beds open into common areas with televisions, sofas, and board games. Margarita Smith, a guard who was named Core Civic's Otay Mesa Employee of the Year in 2019, said managers frequently discouraged workers from wearing masks. The topic came up during briefings in March. They didn't want anyone wearing masks, said Smith, who was tapped by Core Civic to lead an employee morale committee in January. They said it would frighten the detainees and make them think that we're sick or something. In a court filing, LaRose, the warden, said policies on masks evolved with guidance from the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Staff was required to wear them around quarantined detainees, and they were optional for other employees starting the 3rd week of March, he said in a statement that Arnold and Smith dispute. Arnold said he wore a mask after learning about the detention center's first case on March 31st, an employee who handed out equipment to guards starting their shifts. Unaware of any ban on facial coverings, detainees thanked him. I was disgusted, Arnold said. It's obvious this thing was ramping up. I knew it was going to happen. I could just tell. The contractor gave masks to detainees on April 10th, but on condition they sign an English language liability waiver, according to several detainees. It quickly retreated after a tense showdown with detainees. Everyone was screaming, said Isis Zavala of Honduras, who refused to sign but was released with an ankle bracelet monitor because a 2007 bout of tuberculosis made her vulnerable. They said, "You just sign it, okay? If you don't want to sign it, we'll just go." On March 17th, the day that San Diego limited public gatherings to 50 people and closed restaurants, colleagues gathered to grill the warden. Smith recalls wondering why so many people, including about half the lieutenants, were allowed to gather so closely together in one room. When an employee pressed for clean rags, the warden answered twice that there was no need because the chemicals used for cleaning were very powerful. Others asked when they would get more wipes and gels. Gloves were hard to find, Smith said. Arnold said the ones he saw were too small for his hands. Hand sanitizer dispensers were often empty. Feeling the warden wasn't taking the virus seriously, Smith felt she had no choice. At 48, she missed a week of work in early March with pneumonia, had asthma, and has been sick off and on since November. She quit. I thought to myself, I'm not going to get sick again, she said. I just had the feeling that things weren't going to go good. The detainees, of course, had no choice but to stay. Carlos Gonzalez Gutierrez, Mexico's consul general in San Diego, wrote ICE April 16th about a generalized fear among detainees, raising concerns about mixing ill and asymptomatic detainees and requiring liability waivers for masks. A consulate hotline got more than 100 calls. Common grievances included a lack of personal hygiene products, social distancing, and masks, Gonzalez Gutierrez said. They complained that they were instructed to drink salt water to deal with pain and that employees were not wearing personal protective equipment. Core Civic spokeswoman Amanda Gilchrist said the contractor rigorously followed guidance of health officials and ICE. She noted that CDC didn't fully embrace masks until the first week of April and said employees and detainees get face coverings without having to sign a waiver. We have responded to this unprecedented situation appropriately, thoroughly and with care for the safety and well-being of those entrusted to us and our communities, she said. Zelaya, 35, said instructions came to wipe surfaces every hour on March 30th, but rags were dirty. She used the same towel to clean toilets, door handles, phone receivers, and her hands. I clean houses, Zelaya remembered telling guards. You can't use the same towel. Oh, we have a special chemical. It kills the bacteria, Zavala said she was told. Victor Rodriguez, 44, was among 35 detainees who went on a 5-day hunger strike April 4th. The Guatemalan man was upset about a detainee who worked in the dining hall handling food and appeared to have a fever, for which he was given ibuprofen. Core Civics says it prohibited detainees with symptoms from working in the kitchen and that it followed CDC guidelines on cleaning and disinfectants. Different stories each time. We have one story from the people that are there and who work there, and another story from the people who run the place. And they don't match ever, apparently. Anyway, authorities insist detainees had plenty of free soap, 23,300 bars from March 24th to April 23rd. But Rodriguez said the bar he got daily was barely enough to wash his hands or shower. Hand sanitizer requests were denied because authorities worried they could be used for homemade alcohol. Elizabeth Cruz, 22, said a detainee who was coughing badly in their cell the first week of April was removed for about a week, returned and removed again before testing positive. Cruz said she reported chest pain and breathing difficulty for 2 weeks, but couldn't get more than allergy medication. I know my body and I am not well, she remembers telling a nurse, who told her there was nothing more she could do. Cruz of El Salvador eventually tested positive and was placed in isolation with 8 other infected detainees. The virus has brought renewed scrutiny to ICE. The agency housed an all-time high of more than 56,000 people last year, with more than 500,000 bookings over a 12-month period. But policies to severely limit asylum and recent releases aimed at controlling the virus reduced the population to 22,340. Overall, ICE has had 3,596 detainees test positive, 27% of those tested. Of those, 967 are currently in custody. The rest were released, deported, or have recovered. At ICE, 45 detention center workers have tested positive, along with an undisclosed number of contractors. Chad Wolf, acting Homeland Security Secretary, told reporters in May in San Diego that ICE stopped taking detainees at Ota Mesa and 1 or 2 others, and will continue to release the elderly and medically fragile. ICE cut the population at Ota Mesa by more than half in 3 months to 376 from 761 on April 1st. For weeks, Ota Mesa had the dubious distinction of the most cases in the ICE system, but the spread effectively stopped. 168 detainees have tested positive since the start of the outbreak, as have 11 ICE employees and more than 30 Core Civic workers. ICE said in a statement that increased testing and isolating detainees who tested positive contributed to improved conditions. Cases are surging at facilities in Farmville, Virginia, with 315 detainees having tested positive. Anson, Texas, with 290, Eloy, Arizona, with 250, and Houston, with 206. At Eloy, 128 of about 315 employees had tested positive as of earlier this month, according to Core Civic, which manages the facility. Arnold resigned after his April 1st confrontation with the warden, just as the virus was tearing through Ota Mesa. Smith took a 2-week leave before resigning, torn over her loyalty to the job and what she considers is Core Civic's tendency to cut corners. Both have sued the company in federal court. Core Civic will address the guards' accounts in court, Gilchrist said, but we can say generally that we deny their specious and sensationalized allegations that are designed to obtain a favorable outcome in court. Daniel Struck, an attorney for the warden, didn't respond to a request for comment. Smith and Arnold believe the spread started with someone from outside, perhaps a guard or lawyer. Smith called detainees sitting ducks. After the first officer got it, it was like fire there, Smith said. It just took off after that. Well, our next article is entitled, Trump is Now Blocking Most of the Legal Paths to Immigrate to the U.S. We already knew this, but let's hear about it. As the coronavirus spreads around the world, the Trump administration has steadily choked off most avenues for legal immigration to the United States, effectively shutting down the system that brings in hundreds of thousands of immigrants annually. In a span of 4 months, people who legally migrated to the United States, or are trying to, have had their lives uprooted amid a litany of changes attributed to the pandemic. The abrupt changes have left immigrants and their families in limbo, confused, frustrated, and scrambling to sort out their next steps. The reasons provided by the Trump administration vary, from protecting American workers at a time when the unemployment rate is high to putting public health first. This week, the future of more than 1 million international students attending universities in the U.S. became uncertain. Immigration and Customs Enforcement announced on Monday that foreign students taking online-only courses, which are becoming more common at universities move away from in-person classes amid the pandemic, may need to transfer schools or leave the U.S. Okay, that has already changed since this story was written, but we'll continue reading because there are some things here that show us how these things are affecting people or have affected people, and as we said earlier, how it confuses them and makes them unsure of their situation here and uncertain that they want to continue here. So anyway, among these students who was in this situation was Shreya Tusu. For 3 years, the 21-year-old senior at the University of California at Berkeley lived and studied in the United States. Now the place she calls home could deport her depending on her university course load. Here's the quote. "We don't really know what's happening. Everyone's trying to find ways that we can schedule an in-person class, but there's not many options." Thusu, who serves as the president of the International Students Association at Berkeley, told CNN. Just a few days ago, companies and foreign workers went through a similar state of worry, while many of the people trying to come to the U.S. on green cards learned there won't be a possibility for the rest of the year. And before that, the Trump administration largely barred migrants, including children and asylum seekers, from entering the U.S. Again, it's chaos, it's confusion. It's making everybody feel like they have no power and are helpless in the face of this impenetrable and inscrutable organization, the administration, the government of the United States, basically, who makes decisions that you can't understand and moves that don't make any sense. That's how they work. Anyway, back to the story. Immigration advocates, lawyers, and experts say there's no doubt the administration is seizing on the pandemic to overhaul the immigration system, pointing in part to a series of recent changes that block the high-skilled immigrants the administration has repeatedly claimed it wants to come to the United States. You would expect that during this massive public health and economic crisis that the administration's agenda would be sidelined, but instead it's been as aggressive, if not more aggressive, than it's ever been, said Sarah Pierce, a policy analyst at the Migration Policy Institute, a think tank based in Washington. Those caught in the crosshairs are suffering the consequences. ICE's announcement this week barring foreign students from taking online-only courses in the U.S. caught many by surprise after the agency had provided more flexibility in the spring. "I was in shock," Valerie Mendiola, a student at Harvard University, told CNN. "We plan our lives accordingly. We work super hard to get here, and then this happens in the middle of our whole experience. Visa requirements for students have always been strict, and coming to the U.S. to take online-only courses has been prohibited. Under the rules, which officials argue were designed to maximize flexibility, students can stay enrolled in universities offering classes online but won't be allowed to do so and remain in the U.S. If a school isn't going to open, or if they're going to be 100% online, then we wouldn't expect people to be here for that," Acting Homeland Security Deputy Secretary Ken Cuccinelli told CNN's Brianna Keller. And let me note here the title, Acting Homeland Security Deputy Secretary Ken Cuccinelli. He is in charge over there because Trump has not nominated anyone for the role of the Homeland Security Secretary, and he created this role for Ken Cuccinelli so that he could be nominally in charge while no one is officially in charge. And Trump has done this to a number of agencies, thus allowing him to get his own hand-picked people running things and not giving anybody else a chance to have any say on who is in charge of these agencies. Another way, another one of many ways that Trump is avoiding the law, avoiding proper process, avoiding the rules, moving around obstacles that are placed there for a reason. Hence my calling it a criminal enterprise, because it is. Criminals do the same thing. I mean, those of us who are required to follow the law, we can't just like, oh, I didn't stop at that stoplight because I went around it. I drove up on the sidewalk and went down the sidewalk. So I wasn't running a stoplight because it wasn't pointed at me. I wasn't on the road. It's that kind of thing that they're doing here. And I guess that belatedly, now that I think about it, is the theme of this show, is how the Trump administration avoids following laws, rules, and procedures created to keep things balanced, to make things done in a way that everybody understands how they work so that they know how to work with them, and so on. These are all procedures that are here for a reason. And by simply running roughshod over the rules, by avoiding going around over and under, as I said earlier, any impediment in its way, it basically makes a mockery of our entire system of justice, of checks and balances, everything. And the fact that members of his own party do not stand up to him on this and do nothing about it and just let it happen is obscene. Yeah, well, you're going to be hearing more of this sort of thing from me as we approach the election, because I am really adamant that this is the most important election that this country has ever faced in its history. We stand at a crossroads between continuing to be a country that fails but tries, and being one that is trying to fail. And that's where we are now. Anyway, back to the story. Sorry. Before ICE's announcement, Harvard had announced that all course instruction would be delivered online during the fall semester. Mendiola says she and other classmates are now pushing the university to reconsider and offer more in-person instruction. If that doesn't happen, she fears she may have no choice but to return to Mexico. That's left her with a list of worries that grows by the hour. What will happen to her apartment and the lease she's already signed, her furniture, her student loans? If I take a leave of absence, I might lose all my loans and all my scholarships, Mendiola said. It's very hard to get money to even be here in the first place. Harvard and Massachusetts Institute of Technology sued the Trump administration over its guidance on Wednesday. So we already know how that turned out. And but I'm reading a lot of this so you can get a sense of the confusion and the uproar that created, and how you might feel as one of these people who was caught up in this whirlwind, to be told that, well, for the moment, it's gone back to the way it was, so you're okay. I don't feel too confident. I don't feel any sense of security coming from, for the moment, it's okay, but it may change again later. That's a horrible way to treat people. I mean, even if nothing else, if people weren't dying because of the pandemic and the inefficiency and the lack of leadership by the government, and if they weren't dying because they were kept in unsafe conditions in their home countries because they're not allowed to come here, just the fact that you screw up people's lives like that you play with their happiness, their sense of order, their confidence in what they're doing and what they can do, all of those things, just playing with them like that is unconscionable and should be unacceptable all by itself, even if you leave out the more severe consequences that exist and are taking place all around this country. Anyway, let me finish this. I'm running out of time. Over the course of Trump's presidency, the administration has overhauled the U.S. immigration system, gutting asylum, reducing the number of refugee admissions to historic lows, and severely curtailing legal immigration, among other changes. The coronavirus pandemic sped up even more tweaks to the system that had previously struggled to gain momentum, such as largely barring entry of asylum seekers at the U.S.-Mexico border and proposing to block asylum seekers on public health grounds. During the pandemic so far, this administration has effectively ended asylum at the southern border, Pierce said. They've drastically decreased legal immigration, especially family-based immigration, into the country. They have effectively ended the diversity visa lottery, and they've significantly decreased the number of temporary foreign workers coming into the country. In a pair of White House immigration proclamations issued in April and June, the administration suspended much of family-based immigration and the number of guest worker visas through the end of the year, with some exceptions. The Migration Policy Institute estimated that some 167,000 temporary workers will be kept out of the United States, and 26,000 green cards will be blocked monthly. As a result of the outbreak, consulates overseas had to close, making it nearly impossible for people overseas to obtain visas. Since January, the number of non-immigrant visas issued has plummeted by 94%. The ripple effects are wide-ranging. Nandini Nair, an immigration partner at the law firm Greenspoon Martyr, based in New Jersey, represents a range of companies, including tech, marketing, and accounting firms, as well as physician and dental offices. I have companies who are thinking, that's it, we're not going to move anyone over anymore, Nair said. Sandra Feist, an immigration attorney based in Minnesota, similarly had human resource professionals reaching out on behalf of their companies worried about the employees they plan to bring on board. Feist recalled a conversation where she was told that if the company can't get its chief operating officer to the U.S., that'll be doom for them. Like the changes that preceded Monday's announcement, some worry the administration is setting the wrong tone and might encourage foreign students to start to look elsewhere. That may be the case for Vitor Possible, a Brazilian who's getting his PhD in economics at Yale. Beforehand, I would say that staying in the U.S. was my first option for my career, he said. Now, being honest, Canada, Europe, and New Zealand and Australia seem like a much better choice. Thusu, who'd planned to apply to medical school in the United States, said she's increasingly feeling like the country where she wanted to build a future sees her as disposable. You hear stuff like this. It's been happening for a while, like the H-1B suspensions for the rest of this year, and that were announced recently. It's just adding on, Thusu said. It's been increasingly really scary. It's increasingly not feeling like home. Well, I don't have time to comment on this, but this has been the reading of, not the reading, this has been CU Immigration here. We appreciate you joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next time.